Welcome to the Bridge Podcast, where we connect you to real estate, business, and global opportunities. And more importantly, we connect you to the way smart investors actually think. And today we're continuing our conversation around the PIER model that we teach inside our Philippine Capital Shift seminars. If our last conversation was about P for position, today we're moving into I for infrastructure. And this part matters because infrastructure is not just about roads, trains, or stations. Infrastructure changes how people move. It changes how long things take. It changes which areas feel connected. And once that happens, it changes value. That is the core idea. Infrastructure equals value because infrastructure improves mobility, it improves access, and it unlocks growth. Or said another way, infrastructure changes how people live, and that changes value. So when we talk about infrastructure as investors, the real question is not just what project is being announced. The better question is, what is making this area easier to live in, easier to work in, and easier to reach? That is the investor mindset. And today, I want to walk you through three of the most important infrastructure stories in the Philippines right now: the Metro Manila Subway, the North-South Commuter Railway, and the Clark Growth Corridor. Let's start with the Metro Manila Subway. This is a very big deal because it is the country's first underground railway. According to GCA, the line is designed to run about 33 kilometers with 17 stations, stretching from Valenzuela City to Parañaque, including a spur to NEA Terminal 3. JICA also says the project is intended to cut travel time on that corridor from about 1 hour and 10 minutes to 45 minutes. Now let's pause there. Why does that matter to investors? Because time is part of value. If a worker, a family, or a business owner can move across Metro Manila faster and more predictably, that changes what locations feel practical. A location that used to feel far can start feeling connected. A place that used to be inconvenient can become more livable. And in dense cities, convenience often becomes pricing power. That is the infrastructure to value connection. It also matters that this project is not tiny. JICA's 2025 update says the financing covers not just tunnels and stations, but also rolling stock, electrical and mechanical systems, and safety systems for future operations. In other words, this is not just a concept drawing. It is a serious system-level investment. And that leads to an important investor rule. Don't invest just because you hear about a project. Invest when it is actually being built, when people will truly use it, and when the price still makes sense, because timing matters just as much as location. Now let's go to the North-South Commuter Railway, or NSCR. This is one of the biggest transport stories in the country because it is not only about Metro Manila, it is about connecting Metro Manila to the wider growth corridor north and south of the capital. ADB describes the NSCR as a 163-kilometer suburban railway network linking the regional growth centers of Clark and New Clark City in the north with central Manila and Calamba in the south. ADB materials also describe the system as having around 35 stations and serving 27 cities and municipalities. That scale matters. This is not one isolated stop. This is corridor infrastructure. And corridor infrastructure does something powerful. It creates a new map of daily life. When people can travel more efficiently between where they live and where they work, the housing market changes, rental patterns change, commuter behavior changes, the range of acceptable home locations expands. Businesses can hire from a wider labor pool, Families can consider areas they would have ignored before. That is why rail is so important to real estate value. It doesn't just move trains, it reorganizes geography. A DB has also highlighted the travel time effect. One ADB summary notes that parts of the line are expected to cut trips that currently take 1 to 2 hours by bus down to roughly 45 minutes to 1 hour by train. Another ADB reference says the rail link is expected to bring travel time from Metro Manila to Clark International Airport to less than 1 hour, compared with roughly 2 to 3 hours by road. Now, think like an investor. If you own or buy in an area that becomes materially easier to reach, you are no longer just selling square footage. You are selling time savings, predictability, access to jobs, and lower daily friction. That is value. And yes, infrastructure can create appreciation stories, but the smartest investors do not just say there's a train, so prices will go up. The smarter question is, will people really use this line? Will it change actual behavior? Will it improve access to real job centers? And has the local pricing already run too far ahead of reality? That discipline matters. Now, let's talk about the Clark Growth Corridor because this is where infrastructure, industry, and long term positioning really start to come together. Clark is not just a single project, Clark is a broader growth story. BCDA describes the Clark Special Economic Zone as spanning about 31,850 hectares, with the Clark Freeport Zone acting as the original seed of its transformation. BCDA also highlights the development of New Clark City, a 9,450 hectare area in Tarlac, designed as a smart, resilient, future oriented city. That already tells you Clark is bigger than one subdivision or one launch. It is being built as an ecosystem, and ecosystems matter more than isolated projects. BCDA's materials say Clark has generated more than 5 billion US dollars in exports, while its asset value exceeds 10 billion US dollars. Clark Development Corporation reporting has also stated that Clark already has more than 145,000 regular workers and 1,213 registered locators, which means this is not just a future narrative. There is already a real employment base there. Then layer in the airport story. BCDA's 2024 annual report says the airport expansion program is designed to accommodate up to 24 million passengers per year, up from 8 million previously. Separate BCDA procurement documents also note that Clark International Airport sits in the Clark Civil Aviation Complex, around 94.6 kilometers from Manila, with access through STEX and NLEX. So now put the pieces together. You have rail connectivity expanding through NSCR. You have airport capacity scaling. You have an economic zone with workers and locators already in place. And you have long range planning in New Clark City. That is not random development, that is a corridor. And corridors are where infrastructure becomes value in a much more durable way because value is being supported by multiple layers at once: transport, jobs, logistics, aviation, and land use planning. This is why, in the PIER model, infrastructure is not just a side note after position. It is the force that can either strengthen position or weaken it. A good position without infrastructure can stay limited, but a good position with infrastructure that genuinely improves mobility and access can become much more powerful. That is why investors need to ask, is this area getting easier to reach? Is commuting getting easier? Is business access improving? Is there a real public use case here? And is the growth story supported by more than one project? Because if the answer is yes, then infrastructure may be creating real value. But let me give you the warning again because this part is important. Do not invest just because you hear about a project. Invest when it is actually being built, people will truly use it, and the price still makes sense because timing matters just as much as location. That is where many investors get trapped. They hear subway, railway, or airport corridor, and they assume every nearby property is automatically a great buy. Not true. Sometimes the infrastructure is real, but the pricing is already overheated. Sometimes the project is impressive, but the micro location still lacks livability. Sometimes the story is strong, but the asset itself is weak. So infrastructure should sharpen your analysis, not replace it. For Filipino investors, the practical takeaway is this: the Metro Manila Subway matters because it changes movement inside the capital and improves urban connectivity. The North South Commuter Railway matters because it changes the scale of what feels commutable between Metro Manila, Clark, and the Southern Corridor, and that can reshape housing demand across a much wider geography. And the Clark Growth Corridor matters because it is not just transport, it is transport plus jobs, plus airport capacity, plus industrial and business expansion. That is the deeper lesson. Infrastructure is not valuable just because it is expensive or high profile. Infrastructure is valuable when it changes daily life in a way that people actually feel. When it reduces friction, when it expands access, when it supports growth, when it makes a location more usable, that is when infrastructure becomes value. And that is why I for infrastructure is such a critical part of the PIER model we teach in our Philippine Capital Shift seminars. If you want to go deeper into how to apply this framework to real investment decisions in the Philippines, connect with us through your global connection, book a strategy session, or join one of our upcoming Philippine Capital Shift seminars. Because the goal is not to chase headlines, the goal is to understand what is being built, what will be used, and where value is truly being created. This is the Bridge Podcast, where we don't just connect markets, we connect you to wealth, wisdom, and world class opportunities. And remember, you're always just one connection away.